Hello. Thank you everyone for joining us today. Welcome. We have so much to talk about today. Of course, we're looking at a new survey commissioned by I-MAK, the Initiative for Medicines, Access and Knowledge, and conducted by Franklin and Marshall College's Center for Opinion Research, all about the impact of the high cost of prescription drugs and the opinions Americans have about the causes and solutions to this crisis. You can read the full report on the survey at i-mak.org/survey, or you can scan the QR code displayed on the bottom of the screen. So we have with us here today Tahir Amin. Tahir is one of the founders and is the CEO of the Initiative for Medicines, Access and Knowledge, I-MAK. It's a nonprofit organization working to address the systemic inequities in how medicines are developed and distributed. His work focuses on changing the structural power dynamics that allow health and economic inequities to persist by challenging and reshaping intellectual property laws and the related global political economy to better serve the public interest. Hey, Tahir.
Thanks, Emily.
And we also have Burwood Yost. Burwood is the director of the Center for Opinion Research and the director of the Floyd Institute for Public Policy at Franklin and Marshall College. He's also the director of the Franklin and Marshall College Poll, which tracks public attitudes towards public policy issues and political campaigns. Burwood's scholarship is multidisciplinary, and his work has appeared in journals across many fields, including criminology, human rights, political science, psychology, and public health. Hi, Burwood.
Good morning, Emily.
Welcome to both of you. In a little while, we'll also be joined by another very special guest, the U.S. Senator from Vermont, Peter Welch, who's a member of the Senate Judiciary and Finance Committees, among others, and who's been a major supporter of patent reform and other prescription drug price legislation that we'll talk about. My name is Emily Pizzacreta. I'm a journalist. I produce a podcast called An Arm and a Leg. It's a show about the cost of healthcare and what we can do about it. And I'll be moderating today's discussion. I have a lot of questions, but we're going to reserve time for questions from the audience too. So we hope you'll use the chat to submit your questions at any point during today's discussion. So I wanted to kick things off by playing for you guys a few audio clips that our team at An Arm and a Leg have collected over the years. So these are clips from interviews with regular people, regular Americans, talking about their experience with the outrageous cost of prescription drugs. And the reason I wanted to bring it in is because, when I read a report like the one we're talking about today, these are the voices that I hear. So if you guys want to fire up that video, we can spend a couple minutes listening to them.
Went to go pick up the prescription and we were like, holy moly, that is so expensive.
I just got all of a sudden a text message from my specialty pharmacy saying that I have a $3,000 copay. That's not a text message that anybody wants to wake up to.
We've been given estimates of $30,000 a dose.
The pharmacist would burst out laughing every time I showed up.
We hit our deductible. Our member share for that medication was like $246 for 1 month.
We see seniors, they come in and they've got 15 medications that they're taking every day. And literally the retail costs are $20,000 a month.
Our healthcare system is like a whack-a-mole from hell.
The drug I was prescribed, Avonex, did not have a generic equivalent, and my insurance did not have it on its formulary. That meant my cost would be about $7,500 per month.
For my particular drug, Enbrel, Enercept, which is a rheumatoid arthritis drug, there is a biosimilar or a generic available in every other country. But in the US, they have a 39-year patent. So the price has been increasing exponentially.
When you are rationing insulin, when you don't know how you're going to get your next prescription, your next fill of insulin, you are in crisis.
I joke now that there is practically nothing I don't know about how to navigate these problems. But also, I spent an enormous amount of time desperate, crying on the phone, on hold, and filing paperwork.
Yeah, you know that Spider-Man meme where they're all pointing fingers at each other? I feel like that's what's happening here.
It's a frustrating fight. I feel bad that people have to wage this to get what they need to be healthy. It's not like people are asking for a BMW. People are asking for medications they need to keep themselves alive.
So thank you for letting me share that. Like I said, those are the kinds of voices that I'm used to hearing about in my reporting. And I hope it adds a little bit of dimension to this conversation as we talk about a lot of those issues. So let's launch right in. Tahir, I want to start with you. Talk to us about why you wanted to commission this survey. What were you hoping to learn, and how were you thinking about that in terms of how it would strengthen your work?
Yeah, thanks, Emily. We hear a lot of these stories as well from patients. We work with a lot of patient groups, and we thought to ourselves, the conversation has moved over the last 5-6 years since we've been doing this work with a number of different organizations. And we wanted to really kind of do a reassessment of where the field is at, because there was a survey by the Kaiser Family Foundation, which had shown that 1 in 3 Americans or 1 in 4 Americans couldn't afford their prescriptions. And we thought, well, where does that sit in relation to, well, what are the solutions to that? And where does the patent system play a role in that? How much does the public know about it? And so that was really the sort of premise of the survey. And based on that, we commissioned a survey, and we had no idea what was going to come out of it. Absolutely none. And that's why we commissioned Burwood and the Franklin Marshall Center, because they're the experts, and we just left it to them and said, well, tell us what comes back. And it's a way. It's also it's a way of checking our own pulse and seeing, are we looking at the right issues? Because at the end of the day, we are happy to be critiqued. We are happy to question what our premises are, what we've seen, what the evidence shows. And so, yeah, let's put it to the American public, because that's who matters the most. It's not really about I-MAK. It's not about sort of anybody else. It's about the patients who are suffering and can't afford their medicine. So that was really the premise of all this.
Thank you. And Burwood, let's talk about your approach. We'll get into the results in a little bit, but talk about a little your methodology and who did you talk to and how did you go about doing it?
Sure. Actually, our approach is relatively traditional. We started by randomly sampling addresses across the United States of America. Once we had that sample of addresses from coast to coast, we mailed all those households information about the survey, about what we were doing, about who we were, about how they could participate. And some people immediately either called us back to talk to our live interviewers, or they went online and completed the survey at a URL that we provided them, which was, of course, password protected. And those people who didn't respond immediately to the initial mailing were then followed up. We followed up with those individuals multiple times. Our interviewers called them on the phone. We sent them text messages. We sent them emails. And we kind of kept after them to encourage them to participate. So a traditional random sample of American adults, that's what we did.
Great. So let's get into some of those results. Burwood, maybe you can start by walking us through some of the bigger takeaways.
Yeah, if I was boiling this down, and I would encourage everybody to, you can go look at the questions that we asked and you can see the analysis that we've prepared. It's all on the website, but I'd say there's probably 3 things that stood out. First is just the general dissatisfaction about our healthcare system. More than a third of the Americans that we talked to said the healthcare system isn't meeting their needs. And the primary reason for that has to do with affordability. And of course, prescription drug affordability is a big part of that problem. And so that is the second big takeaway, how common these experiences are in terms of being able to afford prescription drugs. I think something like 71% of adults who said that they had used prescriptions in the preceding year, and 1 in 3 of those people did not fill a prescription because of the cost. And another portion of people who didn't ever have a prescription were told they needed one, but they didn't get one because they couldn't afford it. So this affordability issue stands out. I mean, we heard it in the excerpts from your reporting, and it's pretty clear that it's common experience in the United States. And you can see, that citizens really are concerned about pricing problems. 82% think we pay more than other countries pay. Similar proportions believe pharmaceutical companies make too much profit. Most people believe that prescription drug prices are unaffordable. And that leads to really the third major takeaway for me, which is there's bipartisan support for reform. And that bipartisan support comes about because the experiences that people have in terms of being able to afford their medications, taking steps to afford their medications, it doesn't differ by party. So whether you're a Republican or a Democrat, you're having the same experiences with prescription drugs. So, I think those are really the big takeaways. Most people aren't happy with our system. It's because of affordability. Drug affordability is a big issue, and there's bipartisan support for all kinds of reforms, including patent reforms. And we can talk a little bit more about the specifics of those things as we go along.
Right, absolutely. So 7 out of 10 adults in the survey think the U.S. needs major reforms, the U.S. healthcare system. What kind of reforms did they talk about supporting?
Well, it's interesting. And I do want to address something that some people may be thinking as they talk about this kind of survey is, what do people really know about the patent process? It's very complicated, right? And we focused on a few items that reflect the outcomes or the issues associated with our patent system. But most of the survey was talking about individuals' experiences when it comes to prescription drug use, how they deal with the cost of prescription drugs, how it impacts their view of the healthcare system, and what they would really like to see happen from a regulatory standpoint. So most of the survey was focused on trying to just understand the experiences of people. Now, when we talk about what people want to do in terms of pricing, there's all kinds of things people are interested in. They're willing to close the loopholes on patent laws. We talked a little bit about that. They want to see the patent process itself reformed. They want to allow consumers to purchase prescription drugs from other countries if it costs less. There are any number of reforms that we tested where we saw pretty much bipartisan consensus in support. But the real issue here is that affordability is a real problem for most people. And it doesn't matter whether they're Republicans or Democrats. They're confronting these issues every day.
Right. So Tahir, when you saw these results, what was your initial impression? And as you've spent more time thinking about them, what strikes you the most?
I was genuinely surprised about the numbers of people who had put patent reform at the top of the agenda in terms of a solution, a bipartisan solution. In so much so that the respondents, there was a higher number of respondents supporting that than drug price negotiation. And now we know the Inflation Reduction Act has made some inroads into addressing some of these pricing issues. But to see a sample like this, a nationwide sample from both sides of the aisle talking about patent reform, and that was really, that surprised me. I was very surprised by that, but also it made me realize that the American public is much more aware of what is going on in the pharmaceutical space in terms of drug prescriptions, and they understand that there's a reason why they're not getting the more affordable medicines. They see, as the survey, as Burwood just mentioned, they see the prices lower in other countries. They see, as in the clip that you had up earlier, that Enbrel has been available in a biosimilar form for several years in other countries, and here we have a situation where Enbrel has been under patent for so much longer than it should be, and people are aware of that. And I feel back to Burwood's comment about people may question, well, what do people really know about the patent system? I think the American public is astute in terms of when it comes to their affordability of prescription. I think they're aware, they know what's going on. And this is not because we are focused on this issue and we want to make patents the center of their understanding. I think they understand why aren't generics coming into the market sooner. And so I think that for me was really the telling point. And then it also stands out that they recognize that corporations are driven by their greed, and they've connected the issue of patents to greed, and that's what tells. I mean, that is depending on where you are on this issue. I think that is a very astute observation on their part.
Oh, thank you. So I want to remind everyone that if you have questions, you can drop them in the chat, and we'll hopefully be able to get to them. Right now, I'd like to welcome Senator Peter Welch. Senator, thank you for taking the time to join this discussion, especially now. It's a really pretty tense and busy moment.
Thank you. I mean, this is an incredible topic. When the issue that is so challenging for so many people is affordability, and nothing is more compelling than affordability when it comes to healthcare. And this survey really does demonstrate the widespread concern that everyday Americans have about prescription drugs. And I want to step back a little bit to talk about what I see as just the structure of the market and the role government's played, and where it's been positive, but also where it's been really, really detrimental to affordability. The drug companies always talk about innovation, and in fact, there is significant innovation. So that's a good thing for them to talk about and a good thing for them to strive to do. But what they don't acknowledge is that the innovation is made possible with enormous governmental action on their behalf. First of all, if you're a pharmaceutical company, any intellectual property company, you get a patent. And that patent means that if you develop this drug, you get a period of exclusivity where you can set the price. You can name your price. And they do it without restraint. And I'll get into the patent thicket and how they abuse the patent system in a moment, but I just want to create a context here that shows incredible pricing power that is not just from patents, but from other governmental actions. Number two, you have Medicare and Medicaid. You have Medicare Part D, where it's guaranteed that folks on Medicare will have prescription drugs made available to them. So the market is created through that, through Medicaid and through employer-sponsored healthcare. Our employers want their employees to be covered for the healthcare needs through employer-sponsored healthcare. So you have government creating a market. You have government creating a period of exclusivity where the pharmaceutical companies can literally name their price. And then you have, and this is where we get into this whole patent thicket thing, where Senator Hawley and I are addressing it in our legislation. You have the patent that gives them a period of exclusivity, and they overreach on the price they set because they can. But then they use legal maneuvers to extend that patent. And one of the devices they use is creating, quote, patent thickets, where they make patents on every tiny variable, the color of the pill, the particular size of the pill, the active agent, things that don't have anything that distinguish it from the original pill, but allows them to kind of create a new claim to extend that period of exclusivity where they have total pricing power. So that abuse is on top of a company that starts out with getting the benefit of a government-created market and a period of exclusivity, and then, of course, the patent. And all of this results in, is what Tahir was saying, we get these incredibly high prices for an incredibly long time. So, I salute our pharmaceutical companies for the scientific research, for the innovation, but it doesn't do a patient all that well if there is this medication that's within reach, but beyond reach affordably. So you can create a good drug that's going to help us, and we need them. But if you make the price so beyond affordability, we can't afford it, it will kill us. And that's where, if there's government that's helping to create these markets, which we should be doing, and we want a really good healthcare system, we have to have some consumer protection in here. And certainly we have to have a minimum of protection where we don't allow that patent system to be abused to inflict continuous and perpetual brutal prices on our consumers, our employers, and by the way, on our taxpayers.
Right, absolutely. And I'd love for us to talk a little bit about, where you see the most promising opportunities in Washington right now to address these issues. And it might be a good place to start a bill that you introduced over the summer, the Ethic Act, Eliminating Thickets to Improve Competition. It's a great acronym. If you want to talk a little bit about, what you're aiming to do with that bill and why you thought it was important.
Sure. Senator Hawley and I, he's conservative Republican, I'm a liberal Democrat, and bottom line, the folks that we represent, it doesn't matter whether they voted for Trump or they didn't. They need medication, and they get hammered with the price of it. And one of the things that inflicts this high price is the abuse of the patent system. So the Ethics Act is about the term that is used in the patent world is thickets, where I invent drug A, I invent aspirin, okay? And then I get a period of, let's say, 14 years where that is up to me to decide how much I'm gonna charge you to buy it. Well, year 14 comes in and I file a new patent that is gonna say, well, it was white, but now it's red. I file a new patent where it was round and now it's square. I mean, in endless variations of patents that apply to something that really is not about improving the drug. Or I have a patent because it used to be you take it by mouth, but now it can be in liquid form and take it by mouth, but not a solid. All these variations that really make no difference in the efficacy of the drug, how it treats you, but where in the patent system, it allows the company that manufactured the original drug, created the original drug, they can now claim it's, quote, new, and therefore extend that capacity that the holder of the patent has to charge whatever price it is they want to charge. We want to end that. One drug, one patent.
Mm-hmm. Tahir, I wonder, if you have anything to add to that, or what your thoughts about the Ethics Act are, and if there's a example in mind, of somewhere that this would have really helped improve access or increase biosimilar competition.
Yeah, and first of all, I want to thank Senator Peter Welch, who's really been a strong advocate of this issue, and and Josh Hawley too. It's important that we have folk in Congress who are willing to stick their neck out on this issue, because it is an issue that is not something that's easy to get involved with. There's a lot around it that makes people not want to touch it. But I'm really honored to be sharing this platform with Senator Welch. I think where the Ethic Act really tries to start is to try and reduce the number of patents, as Senator Welch said. The kind of thickets, what they will do is they'll have, many people will probably think you get one patent or a few patents related to a drug. That is not the case. And I think it would be a nice opportunity here to actually play a clip, if we have it, of where Senator Cornyn, this was in 2019, where he was asking the CEO, Richard Gonzalez of AbbVie, of how many patents they had on the rheumatoid arthritis drug, Humira. I don't know if that's possible to play, just to sort of...
Humira has 247 patents, and some of those patents don't expire until 2034. And as Senator Stabenow pointed out, Humira first was sold to patients in 2003. So is it your company's position that it should have an exclusive monopoly on that medication for 31 years?
Senator, no, it's not. It's essentially the patents cover innovations that we created. And I think one of the things that's been lost here is it doesn't matter how many patents you have, and those are applications that you described, not actual patents, but there's a large portfolio of patents. It has 136 patents.
So there we have, actually, there's a couple of points I want to make here. A lot of people in the patent world like to critique I-MAK's data, and that's fine. We're open to that. But here we have a CEO who's actually admitting, actually confirming the numbers that we have found. So I just want to make that point there because many people probably haven't replayed this clip in a long time. And the thing is what allowed AbbVie to do, and this is where I think the Ethic Act would actually target some of the practices that AbbVie did in this case, because AbbVie's main underlying molecule should have ended in 2016. And they were able to, because of the thickets that they built, and what they did was they have several different families, as Senator Welch mentioned. They'll make different variations and they'll apply patents for each variation. And some of those variations they don't use. It's what I would call they squat on this knowledge, which is really it's not even new. It's just that the patent system the standards have slipped so low that it's easy to get these patents. And so they build these thickets, this kind of like landmines. And so if you're a competitor, you have to navigate these landmines. And I think the Ethic Act would actually at least remove some of those blockages and some of those landmines. But in the case of Humira, AbbVie was they had patents running until 2034. Whilst they did not necessarily realize all that period, competition only entered in 2023. So they got an extra 7 years beyond their main underlying patent, which was the real invention, if you might say. And in that period, they made $114 billion in revenue. The price went up almost twofold between 2016 and 2023. They made more money in that 7 years than they did when the drug first came onto the market in end of 2002, until the main patent expired in 2016. So for anybody to tell me that yes, that we're doing these kind of minor improvements or whatever, there's a business strategy behind that, and it's to maximize revenue. And so when we see the results of the survey show that Americans think there's too much greed coming from corporations in the pharmaceutical sector particularly, that is shown in the way they carry out their entire business practice. And Humira is a great example of that. And I think the Ethic Act is the beginning of something that we should be advocating for. But if we really want to get to the promised land, then we have to stop these patents from being granted in the first place. Most of the remedies out there, most of the legislation out there is after the fact. And after the fact is very hard to prove and resolve in the patent world. But it's a great start. What we need to get to is we need to say, okay, well, what really does deserve a patent? Because the games that the pharmaceutical companies are playing, hiding behind language such as convenience, improvement, a lot of that stuff is not novel. A lot of that stuff is not new. And what they do is they muddy the water by saying, oh, well, we're not going to invest. Investment has nothing to do with novelty and obviousness, which is a standard that the patent system says. But what we have is a system now which basically doles out patents just because you're investing. That means if I've got lots of money, I can essentially get a patent.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we have a question submitted from the audience that relates to that. Tahir, what you think beyond the Ethic Act, what other sort of patent reform mechanism would you champion?
For us, it's always been raising the bar for what is deserved of a patent. What we want to do, what we believe is pharmaceutical companies have immense capability of making really inventive, groundbreaking medicines. They do. But they have chosen a business model to take a shortcut. They say, well, actually, once my main patent is coming off, I'm not going to go back to the laboratory. I'm going into financial engineering. I am going to find ways that I can keep my shareholders happy and then I can bring in billions of revenue for an extra 4 or 5 years till I figure out what I'm going to do next, which company am I going to acquire, or what have you. Companies now spend more on share buybacks and dividends than they do on R&D. I mean, not every company, but that's becoming the norm. And I think we need to change the incentives of the patent system, because the incentives have dropped. It's become so much easier. If we change that, companies are going to have to, if they want to stay in the game, they're going to have to invent. And I know this is a bit semantics, but the language of innovation has actually created the problem we are in, because innovation can mean anything. And that's why making slight improvements, changing the color of a pill, changing from a IV delivery to a subcutaneous, which Keytruda is a great example of. I know there's been a lot of noise around Keytruda in the last few months, because Merck is doing a product hop, which is where the IV version is going to supposedly come off patent in 28, which it won't, but they're switched in the product to a subcutaneous, which is an injection. Now, this technique has been done with several other drugs, but yet Merck has got a patent for using a similar enzyme with the existing drug. That kind of stuff has to stop. Let the marketplace decide. If we really think about free markets, let the marketplace decide where that product, how valuable that product is. But a patent shouldn't be the determinant of that. Do the underlying discovery and research, sure, get a patent. But making these tweaks and making these slight modifications and then selling it as convenience, I think that's where the industry has copped out.
You know, did you want to add something to that? Yeah.
Well, I was gonna say, where there's some alignment with my Republican colleagues is on marketplace and competition. That it's being stifled. If you can make money by just continuing to keep other competitors out, and you also can save more money for the buybacks in the dividends rather than put it in R&D, because you've got to keep ahead of the game, and you're allowed to do that because you can create these patent tickets, then we don't get innovation. That's the irony. We don't get innovation because you've got a business model facilitated by an abuse of the patent system, where you can make an immense amount of money by lawyers creating these patent thickets rather than scientists creating better, more efficacious drugs. So there is some capacity here for Republicans and Democrats to agree, because at the end of the day, all of us are concerned about the well-being and health of the people we represent, also about affordability, which is brutal. So that, I think, Tahir has done a really good job in terms of explaining what those intersections are, where there's potential for bipartisan cooperation, as we have with, two quite different senators between me and Mr. Hawley.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, as you said, affordability is just at the top of everybody's minds. And I wonder, where you see patent reform, things like the Ethics Act, in relation to other efforts to lower drug prices.
Well, it's a place where we can make some progress, and that's why I think we've got some real potential to get something like this passed. We've got other problems right now in Congress, as in we're shut down, and we're having a battle about the shutdown. Really is about affordability in healthcare. It's all part of the same system. I mean, healthcare is such a big part of our economy. It's almost 20%. And we spend the most and get the least of major industrialized countries. The costs are brutal. That has an impact in every single way. Pharmaceutical costs happen to be one of the highest, fastest rising areas of expense in healthcare. And that's why the focus that Tahir has, I have, Senator Hawley have, on trying to address that is an element that is absolutely essential to try to rein in these incredible healthcare costs. But we've got the lament in the shutdown that we're in now, which is not our topic, is related to the cost of healthcare, because if these premium tax subsidies, tax credits expire, those small businesses that get healthcare through the exchange, those individuals who get it through the exchange, their premiums are going to skyrocket. And that's on top of the price pressure that is coming from the ever rising costs of pharmaceutical drugs.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I thought in the survey it was pretty interesting to look at who believes that price regulations of drugs are needed, and looking at household incomes and how that affected people's opinions on this. Burwood, I wonder if you could sort of walk us through that a little bit. Why you looked at that and what you found.
Well, sure. I mean, I think in part it's a check on the data that you have, right? Because you know how different income groups, along with insurance coverage groups, might have to deal, how prescription drug and other healthcare costs would affect them. I think what was most interesting about the data, which we have in the report, is that some of the strongest relationships between support for more regulation of drug prices in general comes from middle income households. So people earning between $50,000 and $100,000 are significantly more supportive than people in other income groups, although it's high across the board to support this. And so these kinds of regulations are really favored by people who are probably most impacted by the higher costs of these prescription drugs in their lives.
Right. And, you also sort of looked at a breakdown of by a party affiliation on some of these issues. If you want to, just go through some of that too, might be interesting.
Well, we did. I mean, I think I really don't want to overstate them, because the truth is, even if there are slight differences in some support, we saw majority support among members of both parties for almost all of these things. I think we had a slide, it was figure 2 in our report, that kind of shows how much support there is among both Democrats and Republicans for the kinds of reforms that were tested. And even though Democrats might have been a little more supportive, we still saw majorities of Republicans and Democrats supporting the reforms that were put forward. And that's the point I raised earlier, that the experiences that Americans have is not dependent on their party. Everybody has similar experiences when it comes to paying for the prescription drugs. And I imagine that's why partisans on both sides support these kinds of reforms.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and Senator, I wonder, if that is reflected in, what you hear amongst your colleagues when they talk about these issues.
It is. Here's what makes me quite sad. All right, the things that the people we represent need, they're the same, whether you're a conservative Republican or a liberal Democrat. We need affordable health care. We need affordable housing, okay? And those are just two things to mention. And they're not affordable. And we get into these ideological arguments about the free market and act as though there's a totally free market in prescription drugs, when in fact there's an enormous role that government plays in creating a market. And that should suggest to all of us, if the pharmaceutical companies are abusing essentially the legal privileges that have been granted to them through the patent process, through the immense amount of investment of taxpayer money into research and development, into the enormous expense of the tax credits that are available to employers when they buy insurance for their employees, then we should also take the responsibility to protect consumers, to protect the people that we represent from an abuse, the pricing power, the incredible pricing power that the pharmaceutical companies have. And we can do that without compromising innovation. I mean, that's just an excuse. Innovation's incredibly important. It's to be nurtured, but it's not to be an excuse to price gouge. And that's where there's an opportunity for both sides, whatever your political orientation is, to say, hey, We represent folks in Missouri. We represent folks in Vermont. All of them need prescription drugs, and they've got to be affordable. That there exist is not good if you can't afford them.
Right. Yeah, I mean, you mentioned sort of how the pharmaceutical companies talk about why they need all this patent exclusivity, why they need to, decide the prices of their drugs. And it's interesting in this survey to see that, such a large percentage of people sort of regard the pharmaceutical companies and the price of drugs being related to a kind of greed. And I wonder, Senator Tahir Burwood, any of you who've spent time thinking and looking at this issue, if you feel like that is a new thing, is that something that has a sentiment that has grown over the years? What do we know, or what's your impression?
Let me just say, can I just say one thing, because then I'm going to have to go. Sure,
thank you so much.
We've seen with the pharmaceutical companies, they used to be run by scientists. They're now run by MBAs. And the orientation in a lot of these companies that started out with the innovation was scientists who were really interested in research and really interested in coming up with things that would really help the health and well-being of folks. They're much more oriented towards MBA financial management, and that's where you're seeing a lot of the money goes into dividends and share buybacks as opposed to R&D, a point that was made earlier in the conversation. And the question for us in public policy, where it is an immense amount of taxpayer money that is going into the pharmaceutical industry with the subsidies for research and development, with the tax subsidies, and then with the patent system, it's our role here to make certain that the consumer has the opportunity to get the benefit of all that investment of taxpayer dollars, not just the shareholders and the folks that are getting the dividends. So this is the challenge for Congress, that if we don't act, then the pricing power of the pharmaceutical industry is unrestrained and is relentless, and it is overwhelming us. So this survey that just documents this, it provides a really factual foundation for us, I think, to create more of a coalition with folks both in Senator Hawley's party and my party to try to give some relief to the American people that just can't survive under the weight of these ever-escalating prices. So thank you so much for the work you all have done and for letting me participate in this with you. I've got to go work hard on the shutdown.
Thank you, Senator. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
See you later.
Emily, I just want to kind of piggyback too on both my last comments and on what the senator just said, because we were talking about regulation of prescription drug pricing. And I want to make sure that people understand, if you look at the survey, that consumers, American citizens, do distinguish between different kinds of regulations and its value. So we ask a question about, should there be more or less or about the same amount of regulation related to the safety of prescription drugs? We asked that question, nearly equal amounts of Americans said, well, there's the right amount, or maybe we need more. It was about a third who said safety regulations are where they should be. A similar number said, maybe we need a little more to make sure the drugs are safe. When you ask that about regulation for prescription drug pricing, only less than 10% say things are okay the way they are. 2/3 of Americans say we need more regulation to control prescription drug pricing. And so I want to make sure people understand that the consumers, they do, I think Tahir said it earlier, that consumers can distinguish different aspects of their experiences and what they want to see from our government. And this is one example where maybe things are fine in one area related to prescription drugs, but they're not fine in another, and Americans recognize that.
Yeah, absolutely. Tyr, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, just to your question about the corporate greed, again, that was one of the more interesting facets for me, because I don't think in a survey I've seen that kind of statistic. I understand basically in the current environment, particularly with the sad events that happen with the health insurance executives, where people have, I mean, if you look at some of the online conversations that have been going on, some of the reports, I think there is this sentiment across different sectors of the healthcare industry, including the pharmaceutical sector, where Americans are they're just fatigued by, they just don't see a way out of this ever increasing prices, and I think that's all culminating now, and this survey really reflects that mood. And I think it's important for all of us who are doing this work to really acknowledge it, and that includes the pharmaceutical industry. That includes those who defend the patent system, or defend high drug prices, or defend that this is how the pharmaceutical industry can only bring new drugs to market. I think it's a time to pause and reflect on, well, who are they serving, and what is their purpose? And it seems to me, until that is understood, we are going to be in this dire situation. And unfortunately for Americans and patients particularly, they're going to be struggling. And I think it's a bit of a cry, this survey for me. It's like things are not getting better, and this has been going on now for 6-7 years. As I said, Kaiser Family Foundation have done a survey. I think it was about 2017, 18, or 19. And we're here 5 years, 6 years on, and we're still saying the same things. So something is fundamentally wrong with the system, and I hope there's some reflection by the pharmaceutical industry in terms of, rather than offering sort of marketing type solutions, such as some of the things that have been going on, like Trump RX, and those are not valid solutions. Those are not going to get to the root of the problem. And so to see this survey and people really look for real regulatory reforms, I think that's where the conversation should be happening, and I'm glad we've been able to at least bring that to light with Burwood and his organization.
Yes. Just to remind everyone, if you have questions, you can drop them in the chat. I'd be happy to read them. Tahir, what do you see as the biggest obstacles to these desired and much needed reforms?
Sadly, it's the power of the pharmaceutical industry. We know they have huge influence in Congress. Their lobbying powers are sort of second to none. I think there is a culture, and this is what the other interesting thing about this survey was. Typically, when we began looking at this work, this area of work in the US over 10 years ago, nearly now, there's a sort of sacrosanct nature around patents. Patents are seen as the idea of progress. It's great. It's something that we shouldn't critique or question. And I think that's shifted over the last 10 years. I think people, because of the way drug prices have increased, people have started to understand the models and the techniques that companies are using. And I think because of that transparency and because of that awareness, now the public is more at least attuned to what is going on. And I think policymakers are more attuned too. But the difficulty is being able to kind of almost rewire our brains to think about the system of patents in a different way. And to say that even if we are to, let's say, such as the proposal I'm making, that we make it a more stringent standard to get a patent, is that going to harm drug development? I don't think it is. But there's a lot of fear around, and that's the industry done a tremendous job of creating that fear, creating that narrative that, oh, if we don't get this, we're not going to do this. And what we've seen is the industry just, to use the words of the Rolling Stones, they just can't get any satisfaction, no matter what incentives have been given over the last 40 years. In fact, we have, from a policy point of view, they have received more and more and more and more and more over the last 40 years in various forms of regulatory incentives. And yet they're still demanding more. In that, based on the conversations I've sat in, the rooms I've been in, they want 20 years of not just they want patent exclusivity, whereas from the date of marketing to the end of the patent, they want that purely exclusive and under patent. Not the sort of, you get a patent, you file, it's 20 years, and that includes your research and development, and then you come to market. No, they just want a blanket 20 years exclusivity. And that's why they use all these strategies. They're literally like vigilantes in the patent system, essentially making up their own rules and games. And I think we need to curb that. And so it's going to be a huge challenge because there's a cultural underpinning to the patent system in the United States, which needs to be rethought and brought into the modern times because it's not how it was intended.
Yeah, so I mean, I think one of the big changes in the last few years was, from the Inflation Reduction Act, the ability for Medicare to negotiate the prices of some number of drugs. And I sort of wonder how you think about that in relation to the patent issue. I know that you looked at drugs that Medicare has negotiated and sort of like analyzed their patenting and pricing practices. And, like I said, I sort of wonder how you think that these different kind of reforms interact. And I know that from the survey, there's broad support for both of those things. But the idea of making generics easier to come to market was probably the most popular. I think I have that right, of all of the sort of reforms discussed.
Yeah, I think there's always going to be a place for price negotiation because even when, for example, let's say there are valid patents and companies, even in that period of exclusivity that they would have under a valid patent, they're probably going to maximize their price. So I think there's always going to be a need for some kind of intervention by the government to regulate prices. I know markets operate differently around the world, but for example, in Europe, at least there is some drug price negotiation. Now, there's a lot of counter to that kind of a model here in the United States, but I think there's something to be, a bit of humility and learn from. Actually, there's probably something to be gained by everyone, and I think if we can create that kind of a system where everybody's gaining, I think that's a healthier system. And so, unfortunately, what we have is we're just serving the pharmaceutical industry more and more and more, and their pie's getting bigger, and everyone else's pie's getting smaller. And so I think that there's going to have to be a number of tools that are used in order to make sure that the American public can get the medicines that they need. And when I think of getting the medicines they need, the freedom to get the medicines that you need, you hear the industry saying when they're critiquing other systems in around the world, they say, well, other countries don't have the freedom because they don't get the medicines first. And my immediate question to that is, what good is that freedom when the drug is available, but you can't afford it? That question never gets answered, and that is the fundamental question that we must actually resolve. And so I think we're going to need various policy levers to solve this problem.
Yeah, I mean, you talked about the sort of public relations argument about innovation that you hear from the drug companies. We have a question from the audience related to that. This is from Patricia Kay. She says, it's difficult to shed light on the fear-mongering of drug companies when so much of the data in the patent office is hidden or difficult to find and understand. Any comment on that?
Yeah, I mean, to find a patent on a drug, we have a database called the Drug Patent Book. We've made it publicly available. The whole purpose of that was to help people, help journalists, help the policymakers to at least get a sense of what's going on. Now, that data is subject to critique. It's subject to saying, well, that patent shouldn't be on there, that patent. We welcome that. But unfortunately, the industry doesn't want to engage in that debate. They want to just say these numbers are outright wrong without even offering any reason for why they're wrong. And the fundamental part of actually why we need this transparency, this is the beginning of the problem, is how can you make policy if you don't know what you're making policy about? Because all this stuff is obfuscated. And it's deliberately done. It's information asymmetry. It's designed so that the industry has the power and can then create their facts, whereas the public and policymakers are in the dark. And we want to change that, and we've tried to change that, and I think we've done a reasonable job with a lot of colleagues who've also done some amazing work, including Patricia, around this. But we need that to be a baseline that pharmaceutical companies must reveal all the patents they have on their drugs, even if it's not necessarily relating to the drug that's on the market, but it could be used to block competition, because there are strategic patents that are not used on the actual product, but are used to prevent somebody else researching in that area. So there's a lot of different narratives around how companies use patents, But the industry just wants to focus on, oh, well, this has nothing to do with the drug, but then there's all these plethora of patents that prevent competition in other ways. And I think these nuances need to be understood, because as a lawyer who's come from the private practice, I know what games they play. I played those games. And it's all about basically how do I keep competition on for as long as possible. And that's their job. That's a lawyer's job.
Right. And that really seems to resonate based on the survey results. A majority of Americans want easier access to generics and biologics. So, I mean, I guess, as we move towards wrapping up, is there anything that you would take away from this survey in terms of, how you want to move forward, shaping public opinion, or pushing lawmakers to take action?
Personally, I think this survey really does. It's resounding in terms of what the American public is feeling about prescription drugs. I think the message is very clear, and I think the message is clear for policymakers that they need to start looking at these regulatory reforms, particularly the patent system, which is where the industry derives its power. And I think the public is starting to has become aware of that. And I think that is where we will be pushing our work and continue to and not just basically, oh, we'll reduce the number of thickets. No, we want better standards at the patent office in terms of how you get a patent. That is where we will get to more of the root of the problem. And then there'll be other policies that can emerge from that will make sure we do get the drugs that we need. And we're not caught in this cycle of these incremental improvements that allow companies to make billions of dollars whilst claiming something new. So we do need a rework of the system.
Is there anything you would want to add to that, Burwood?
No, I mean, I think the reality is that, this survey really underscores the difficulties that Americans have paying for prescription drugs, the concerns that they have about how the system functions, and they clearly want to see something change. Whatever those changes might be, people are looking for somebody to do something about the cost of these drugs, because many people in their everyday lives are doing things to afford them. And that includes skipping them or taking less of a prescribed drug than they should, or trying to substitute, something over the counter. I mean, these kinds of behaviors also have costs in the long term for all of us. And so, I'm just happy that we could document some of those experiences to help policymakers understand the circumstances of Americans' lives at the moment.
Absolutely. Well, thank you both so much for this. Again, you can read the survey. Oops, I lost the URL. It's i-mak.org/survey. You can scan that QR code. You can find me on an Arm and a Leg show, armandalegshow.com, or wherever you get your podcasts. And yeah, thank you everyone for joining.
Yeah, and I just want to thank Burwood and his organization again for the amazing work that they did conducting this survey, because at the end of the day, this was really, it wasn't something that we were involved in. We passed the ball to them, and they did that. They went out and they spoke to the American public, and I think the messages were very clear. So we appreciate that, Burwood. Thank you.
My pleasure. Thanks.